The wind came down through Black Hollow Creek like it had business there. Cold. Sharp enough to find the gaps in a man's coat and remind him winter was coming whether he was ready or not. Elias Mercer stood on the porch of his ranch house, one hand resting on the worn railing his father had built 40 years back, and watched the dust rise on the far ridge. They were coming again. He didn't need to see them clearly to know who it was. Silas Vane didn't send his men in small numbers anymore. Not after the fence incident. Not after Elias had made it clear he wasn't interested in selling, wasn't interested in negotiating, wasn't interested in anything Vane had to offer, except maybe the view of his backside leaving Mercer property. The autumn sun cut low across the valley, turning everything the color of old copper. Elias was 73 years old. His hands didn't work quite right in the mornings anymore. His left knee complained about weather changes 2 days before they happened. He'd buried his wife 8 years back and hadn't spoken to either of his sons in more than a decade. He was, by every practical measure, exactly what Silas Vane thought he was. An old man holding on to something he couldn't defend. Vane was wrong about that, but he wouldn't know it for another 3 days. "Boss," the voice came from behind him. Tommy Fairfield, the only hand still working Mercer Ridge full-time, stepped out onto the porch. Young kid, 26, maybe 27, good with horses, terrible with cards, and loyal in the kind of stubborn way that made Elias think of himself at that age. "I see them," Elias said. "Want me to get the rifle?" "Won't need it. Not today." Tommy shifted his weight, uncertain. "They cut the fence on the north pasture again last night. Found it this morning. Clean cuts, both wires." "I know." "Boss, this is the third time in 2 weeks. They're not even being subtle anymore." Elias didn't answer. He watched the riders come closer. 5 men. No, 6. Vane himself in the lead, sitting his horse like he owned the whole valley and was just waiting for everyone else to acknowledge it. "You know what he's going to say," Tommy said quietly. "I do. And I'm going to tell him the same thing I told him last time." Tommy was quiet for a moment, then, "People in town are talking, saying maybe you should take the offer, saying it's not worth getting hurt over." Elias finally turned to look at the young man. Tommy had worked for him for 3 years. Good years, mostly. The kind of years where a man learned whether the person next to him would stand when things got hard or find reasons to be somewhere else. "You thinking about leaving?" Elias asked. Tommy met his eyes. "No, sir. But I'm also thinking you shouldn't be standing here alone when those men ride up." Elias almost smiled. "Alone's relative, son." He turned back to watch the riders. They were close enough now that he could make out faces. Silas Vane rode a big gray gelding, the kind of horse that cost more than most men made in a year. He wore a long coat tailored in Denver, a hat that had never seen real work, and an expression that suggested he was already bored with whatever conversation was about to happen. Behind him rode Marcus Tate, Vane's foreman and the man everyone in the valley knew did the actual dirty work. Tate was built like he'd been carved out of a cliff face, all angles and hard edges. The other 4 men were ranch hands, maybe hired guns. Hard to tell the difference these days. They pulled up at the fence line, 30 yards from the house. Vane didn't dismount. That was a choice, a statement. You didn't get off your horse when you were talking to someone you didn't consider an equal. "Elias!" Vane called out. His voice carried easy across the distance, smooth, practiced. "Beautiful afternoon. Vane, mind if we come up to the house? Have a civilized conversation?" "I mind." Vane smiled. It was the kind of smile that made Elias think of dogs showing teeth. "Still stubborn as ever. That's fine. We can talk from here." He shifted in his saddle, taking his time. "I'm going to be direct with you, Elias, because I respect your time. This back and forth, it's getting old. You know what I want. I've made you a fair offer. More than fair, honestly, considering the condition of your operation. Wasn't aware my operation was your concern. It becomes my concern when it's blocking progress for the entire valley." "Progress. That's right." Vane gestured broadly at the land around them. "You control the creek crossing. You know it. I know it. Every rancher downstream knows it. That water feeds 12 operations besides yours. Good people, hard-working families, all dependent on your goodwill. Now I've got plans, big plans, to modernize water management in this valley. Build a proper irrigation system, something reliable, Something that doesn't depend on the whims of one old rancher sitting on a piece of land he can barely work anymore. Tommy tensed beside Elias. The kid had good instincts. "You done?" Elias asked. Vane's smile tightened. "Almost. Here's the thing, Elias. I've been patient, real patient. I've offered you a price that would let you retire comfortable. Buy a place in town, spend your last years easy. But patience isn't infinite." "That a threat?" "It's a reality." Vane leaned forward in his saddle. "You're one man, Elias. One old man with a failing ranch and no help. Accidents happen out here. Fences break. Cattle wander. Sometimes they wander right off cliffs or into ravines. Sometimes buildings catch fire in the middle of the night. And by the time anyone notices, there's nothing left but ashes." The words hung in the air like smoke. "You threaten my stock or my property again," Elias said, his voice low and level. "And we're going to have a different kind of conversation." Vane actually laughed. "With what? You and this boy here? Marcus alone could go through both of you before breakfast." Marcus Tate didn't react to the mention of his name. He just sat his horse watching Elias with the flat eyes of a man who'd hurt people before and would do it again without losing sleep. "I'm giving you 48 hours, Vane said. 2 days to think real hard about your situation. After that, I stop asking nicely. After that, things happen that nobody wants, but everybody sees coming." He gathered his reins. "You're a smart man, Elias. Smart enough to know when you're beat. Don't make this harder than it has to be." He turned his horse and started back the way he'd come. The 5 men with him followed. They didn't hurry. Didn't need to. The message had been delivered. Elias watched them until they disappeared over the ridge. Then he turned and walked back into the house without saying a word. Tommy followed him inside. "Boss, get paper and a pen." "What?" "Paper. Pen. Writing desk in the study." Tommy hesitated, then went to get them. Elias stood in the center of his living room, looking at the walls. Photographs hung there. Old ones, mostly. His wife Margaret on their wedding day. The ranch in the early years, when it was just him and his father working 16-hour days to turn hard ground into something that would grow. And 2 other photographs, smaller, tucked in the corner where most people wouldn't notice them. 2 boys, one maybe 15, one maybe 13, standing in front of this very house, both wearing expressions that suggested they'd rather be anywhere else. Tommy returned with the paper and pen. "I need you to ride to Silver Falls," Elias said. "Tonight. There's a telegraph office there." "It's 18 miles. "I know how far it is. What am I sending?" Elias sat down at his desk and started writing. His handwriting was getting worse, age mostly, but the words were clear enough. He wrote 2 messages. Both short, both to addresses Tommy didn't recognize. When he finished, he folded each piece of paper carefully and handed them to Tommy. "Send these exactly as written. Don't add anything, don't change anything. You understand?" Tommy looked at the papers. "Who am I sending these to?" "People I haven't talked to in a long time. Boss, if you're calling in help, I should know who's coming." Elias stood up slowly, his knee protesting. He walked to the window and looked out at the valley. The sun was lower now, casting long shadows across the land he'd worked his whole life. "You ever have family you pushed away?" he asked quietly. Tommy didn't answer. "I did," Elias continued. "Had my reasons at the time. Reasons that seemed real important. Now I look back and I can't quite remember what they were." He turned to face Tommy. "Those messages are going to my sons, Ronan and Caleb. And when they get here, if they get here, things in this valley are going to change real fast." "I didn't know you had sons." "Most people don't. That's by design." Elias moved to the fireplace, where a rifle hung above the mantel. He took it down, checked the action. "I told them to leave and never come back. Told them they weren't welcome here. That was 11 years ago, and I meant every word when I said it." "Why call them now?" "Because I'm about to do something that might get me killed, and I'd like to see them one more time before that happens. And because," he paused, choosing his words carefully, "because I might have been wrong about some things. And a man my age doesn't get many chances to fix his mistakes." Tommy stood there holding the messages, trying to process what he was hearing. "Ride tonight," Elias said. "Fast as you can. Send those telegrams, then get back here. And Tommy, when you come back, bring every bit of ammunition we've got in the storage shed. All of it. We're going to need it." The young man left 20 minutes later, riding hard toward Silver Falls under a sky turning the color of blood and copper. Elias stood on his porch and watched him go. Then he went back inside, poured himself 2 fingers of whiskey, and started making a list of everything that needed to be done before Silas Vane's deadline expired. 3 days earlier. The town of Redemption sat 47 miles southwest of Mercer Ridge, across 2 mountain passes and a stretch of badland that wasn't quite desert but wasn't quite anything else either. It was the kind of town that existed because somebody had struck silver once, and even though that mine had been dry for 15 years, people kept living there out of stubbornness or lack of anywhere better to go. Ronan Mercer sat in the back corner of the Broken Spoke Saloon, playing cards with 3 men who were about to learn an expensive lesson about reading tells. He was 32 years old, built lean and hard from years of staying alive in places where staying alive wasn't guaranteed. His black duster hung on the chair behind him, dusty from 2 weeks of travel. His gun belt was buckled loose across his lap where he could reach it without anyone at the bar noticing. The dealer was a fat man named Copeland who sweated too much and talked too little. The other 2 players were ranch hands passing through, looking for easy money and finding the opposite. "Call," Ronan said, pushing chips into the center of the table. Copeland laid down 3 queens with the expression of a man who thought he'd just won something significant. Ronan showed his straight and pulled the pot toward him without ceremony. "Christ," one of the ranch hands muttered. "How long you been sitting on that?" "About as long as it took you to bet badly." The man's face reddened. His friend put a hand on his arm. "Let it go, Harris. We're done." They left. Smart choice. Ronan had developed a reputation in certain circles, and none of that reputation suggested he was someone you wanted to push. Copeland stayed in his seat, shuffling cards with thick fingers. "You planning to take the rest of my money, or can I buy you a drink to ease the pain?" "Drink sounds fine." They moved to the bar. Copeland ordered whiskey for both of them. The bartender was a thin woman with gray hair and eyes that had seen too much to be impressed by anything anymore. She poured without comment. "Heard you were in Cheyenne last month," Copeland said. "Something about a range war up there." "Wasn't a war. Was a misunderstanding that got resolved." "Heard you resolved it with 6 shots and a man bleeding out in the street." Ronan didn't respond. He drank his whiskey and watched the room in the mirror behind the bar. Old habit. You learned who was watching you by watching them first. "You ever think about settling down?" Copeland asked. "Maybe find a nice quiet town, work for a living instead of—" He gestured vaguely at Ronan's person. "Whatever it is you do." "I work for a living." "You know what I mean." Ronan did know. He'd been hearing variations of this question for years, mostly from people who thought they were being helpful, offering advice that came from a place of genuine concern. The answer was always the same. "Can't settle," he said simply. "Don't have the temperament for it." What he didn't say was that he'd tried once, long time back, before he'd learned that some men weren't built for peace, weren't wired for the kind of slow, steady life most people wanted. He'd learned that lesson in blood and regret, and he didn't intend to repeat it. The door to the saloon opened. A boy came in. Couldn't have been more than 14. He looked around nervously, spotted Ronan at the bar, and walked over with the careful steps of someone approaching a dangerous animal. "You Ronan Mercer?" the boy asked. Ronan turned slowly. "Depends on who's asking." "Telegraph office sent me. Got a message for you. Urgent," they said. Ronan took the paper, gave the boy a coin. The kid left quickly. Copeland watched with interest. "Bad news?" Ronan read the telegram 3 times. It was short, 22 words, including the signature. "Trouble coming. Need you home. 48 hours. I know what I said before. This is different. Come if you can. Father." He stared at the words like they might rearrange themselves into something that made more sense. "Everything all right?" Copeland asked. Ronan folded the telegram carefully and put it in his pocket. Then he finished his whiskey in one swallow, stood up, and dropped money on the bar. "Where you going?" "North." "Thought you said you don't settle." "I don't." Ronan adjusted his gun belt, shrugged into his duster. "But I never said I don't go home when called." He left the saloon, went to the livery, and saddled his horse, a dark bay gelding with good wind and better temperament. By the time the sun had fully set, he was already 10 miles out of Redemption, riding hard toward a place he'd sworn never to return to. The land he crossed was empty in the way only frontier country could be. Miles of nothing punctuated by occasional homesteads, their windows dark and doors barred against whatever moved in the night. He passed through settlements that barely qualified as towns, collections of buildings that existed more out of defiance than purpose. He rode through the night and into the next day, stopping only to rest the horse and grab a few hours of sleep in his bedroll under stars that seemed closer out here than they did anywhere else. His mind kept circling back to the telegram. I know what I said before. Yeah. Ronan knew too. He remembered every word of their last conversation, 11 years back. Remembered the anger in his father's voice, the disappointment, the finality. You want to live like this. You do it somewhere else. You're not welcome here anymore. Ronan had left that night and hadn't looked back, hadn't written, hadn't sent word, had become exactly what everyone expected him to become. A gun for hire, a man who solved problems with speed and accuracy, someone you called when talking had failed and action was required. Now his father was calling him home. That meant things were bad. Worse than bad. Elias Mercer wasn't the kind of man who asked for help, wasn't the kind who admitted he needed anyone for anything. Ronan pushed the horse harder. Down. Meanwhile, 180 miles east, Caleb Mercer sat in a hotel room in the territorial capital, reading reports by lamplight and trying to ignore the headache building behind his eyes. He was 29 years old and carried credentials identifying him as a federal land surveyor. That was the story he'd been using for the past 8 months while he investigated a series of fraudulent claims scattered across 3 territories. The reality was more complicated. The documents spread across his desk told a story about corruption, forged filings, and a systematic effort to seize control of water rights through legal manipulation. At the center of it all was a name that kept appearing in different contexts, Silas Vane. Caleb had been tracking Vane for almost a year. The man was careful, kept layers of insulation between himself and anything that could be directly traced back to him. But Caleb was patient, methodical, and very good at finding patterns other people missed. He was 3 weeks away from having enough evidence to bring formal charges. Then the telegram arrived. A knock on his door interrupted his reading. He opened it to find the hotel clerk holding a message envelope. Came urgent, sir. From Silver Falls. Caleb took it, gave the clerk a coin, closed the door. He read the telegram standing by the window. Vane making his move. 48 hours. Need you here. Time to finish this. E.M. His father's initials, his father's terse writing style, and a message that confirmed what Caleb had suspected for weeks, that Silas Vane's operations weren't just scattered criminal enterprises. They were building towards something specific. Black Hollow Creek. Caleb had known about his father's ranch. Knew Vane had been pressuring him. He'd been monitoring the situation from a distance, gathering evidence, waiting for the right moment to act. Apparently that moment had been chosen for him. He packed quickly. Years of moving from place to place had taught him to travel light. Everything important fit in 2 saddlebags and a document case he kept locked. Before he left, he sent 3 telegrams. One to his supervisor in the federal office, reporting that he was moving into the field to close his investigation. One to a judge in Silver Falls who owed him a favor, asking him to stand by for potential emergency filings. And one to a contact in Cheyenne who specialized in finding people who didn't want to be found. Need to know if Ronan Mercer is in the area. Urgent. Will pay standard rates. The reply came back 2 hours later. Spotted in Redemption 3 days ago. Moved north yesterday. Direction suggests Black Hollow Creek region. Confirm? Caleb confirmed and paid the fee. So his brother was coming too. That complicated things. Or maybe it simplified them. Hard to tell with Ronan. They hadn't spoken in 11 years, hadn't seen each other in even longer. The last time they'd been in the same room, words had been exchanged that probably couldn't be taken back. Things about responsibility, about choices, about what it meant to be a Mercer. Ronan had chosen one path, Caleb had chosen another. Now they were both heading home. Caleb rode out at dawn, his gray coat buttoned against the morning chill, his mind already working through scenarios and contingencies. He was good at planning, at seeing 6 moves ahead, at preparing for variables other people wouldn't consider. But there were some variables even he couldn't predict. Like what would happen when 2 brothers who'd built their lives on different versions of justice finally stood on the same ground again. Like whether their father had called them home to save the ranch, or to say goodbye. Back at Mercer Ridge, day 2. Tommy returned from Silver Falls at midday, his horse lathered and breathing hard. He'd ridden through the night and looked like it, eyes red, face drawn, moving with the stiff movements of someone who'd spent too many hours in the saddle. "Telegram sent," he reported to Elias. "Both of them. No problems." "Good. Get some rest. We've got work to do tonight." "What kind of work?" "The defensive kind." They spent the afternoon preparing. Elias had Tommy move supplies into the main house: food, water, ammunition, medical supplies. They reinforced the doors with crossbars Elias's father had installed decades back, but never needed to use. They checked the sight lines from every window, noted the blind spots, discussed fields of fire like soldiers planning for a siege, because that's what this was becoming, a siege. That evening, as the sun dropped toward the horizon, Elias stood in his yard and looked at the land around him. The creek ran smooth and cold through the property, its banks lined with cottonwoods that had been here longer than any man. Beyond that, pastures stretched up toward the ridge, where cattle grazed in the last light of day. This land had been worked by 3 generations of Mercers. His grandfather had claimed it when there was nothing here but rock and determination. His father had built the ranch house, dug the irrigation channels, fought off claim jumpers and weather, and every other challenge the frontier could throw at a man. Elias had inherited it all and spent 40 years maintaining it, improving it, turning it into something that could sustain a family. And now Silas Vane wanted to take it because he could. Because he had money and men and lawyers who knew how to make illegal things look legal. Because he'd decided the water was more valuable than the people who'd protected it for generations. Elias had lived his whole life doing things the right way. Playing by rules, respecting boundaries, believing that hard work and integrity meant something. He was done playing by rules. "Boss?" Tommy's voice pulled him back to the present. The young man was standing on the porch, holding a rifle. "Sun's going down," Tommy said. "You think they'll come tonight?" "No, Vane's a bully, but he's not stupid. He'll wait until his deadline expires. Give me time to think about it, maybe change my mind. He still believes this can be resolved without anyone getting hurt." "Can it?" Elias didn't answer that. They ate dinner in silence. Afterward, Elias sat on his porch with a shotgun across his lap, watching the stars come out one by one. He thought about his wife, about conversations they'd had about their sons, about mistakes he'd made and couldn't fix. He thought about Ronan, who'd inherited his grandmother's quick temper and his mother's sense of justice, who'd been the kind of boy who couldn't see someone hurt without wanting to fix it, who'd gotten into fights defending kids half his size, who'd learned to use a gun because he believed good men needed to be able to protect things worth protecting. And then somewhere along the way, that boy had become someone else. Someone harder. Someone who used violence as a tool instead of a last resort. Elias had driven him away for that, had told him to leave and not come back. Had he been right? Or had he just been afraid of seeing what his son was becoming? He thought about Caleb too, the quiet one. The one who'd always been watching, always thinking 3 steps ahead. Who'd left home at 19 to study law in the territorial capital and never came back except for his mother's funeral. Who'd sent letters for the first few years, then stopped when Elias stopped responding. 2 sons, both driven away by a father who thought he was doing the right thing. Now he was calling them home to help him fight a battle he probably couldn't win. Some men might call that hypocrisy. Elias called it desperation. "They'll come," he said quietly to the darkness. "And when they do, we'll see if 11 years was too long to ask for forgiveness." The stars didn't answer, but somewhere to the south and somewhere to the east, 2 riders pushed their horses through the night, racing toward a home neither of them was sure they'd recognize anymore. Racing toward a father who'd pushed them away. Racing toward each other. And racing toward a reckoning that had been building for longer than any of them realized. Ronan arrived first, 2 hours before dawn on the 3rd day. Elias heard the horse before he saw the rider. Single hoofbeats coming slow and measured up the valley road. He was sitting in his rocking chair on the porch, the shotgun still across his lap, watching the darkness thin to gray at the edges of the mountains. The rider stopped at the fence line. Didn't dismount, just sat there looking at the house like he was deciding whether to come closer or turn around and leave. Elias stood up, his knee protesting the movement. He walked to the edge of the porch and waited. After a long moment, the rider nudged his horse forward through the gate. When he came into the lamplight spilling from the house windows, Elias felt something catch in his chest. The face was older, harder, marked by years of sun and wind and things that left scars deeper than skin. But it was still recognizable. Still his son. Ronan dismounted slow, keeping his hands visible. Old habit, probably. The kind of thing you learned when you lived the way he did. They stood there looking at each other across 20 feet of dusty ground. "You look like hell," Elias said finally. "You look older. 11 years will do that." Ronan tied his horse to the rail. His movements were careful, controlled. Everything about him suggested tension held in check, like a rope pulled too tight. "Got your telegram." "Figured you did, since you're standing here." "Thought maybe you sent it to the wrong person. Thought maybe you forgot what you said last time we talked." "Didn't forget." "Then why'd you call?" Elias gestured toward the house. "Come inside, coffee's hot. We can talk." "I'd rather talk out here." "Suit yourself." Elias moved back to his chair, lowered himself into it with the careful movements of a man whose body didn't work like it used to. "Silas Vane's trying to take the ranch. Gave me 48 hours to sell or face consequences. That deadline expires this morning." Ronan was quiet for a moment. "Vane. Heard that name before. Cattle baron out of Denver, right? Big operation? Used to be big. Word is he's overextended now. Made bad investments. Lost contracts. Needs water rights to keep his empire from collapsing. And he wants your creek. Wants the whole valley eventually. But yeah, creek's the key. Controls the water, controls everything downstream." Ronan pulled off his hat, ran a hand through his hair. It was longer than Elias remembered, tied back with a strip of leather. "So you called me home to help you fight a range war against a man with money and hired guns." "That's about the size of it." "And you thought I'd come because we parted on such good terms?" The bitterness in his voice was sharp enough to cut. Elias met his son's eyes and didn't look away. "I thought you'd come because this is your home, whether you want to admit it or not, and because some things matter more than old arguments." "Old arguments," Ronan laughed, but there was no humor in it. "That what we're calling it now?" "What would you call it?" "I'd call it you telling me I was a disgrace to the family. That I'd become exactly the kind of man you'd spent your life trying not to be. That I should take my guns and my reputation and get as far from this place as possible because you didn't want that kind of poison anywhere near your land." The words hung in the air between them. Elias took a breath. "I remember what I said. Do you remember why you said it? Because I was scared. Because I looked at you and saw someone I didn't recognize anymore. Someone who'd killed 3 men in Cheyenne and walked away like it was nothing. Those men had just murdered a family over a land dispute. Father, mother, 2 kids. I tracked them for 6 weeks and caught them celebrating in a saloon. You're damn right I killed them. And yeah, I walked away. What did you want me to do? Feel guilty about it?" "I wanted you to feel something." Ronan stared at him. "I felt plenty. Still do. Difference is I don't apologize for stopping bad men from doing bad things." Elias was quiet. This was the argument they'd had 11 years ago, the one that had ended with Ronan packing his saddlebags and riding out before sunrise, the one that had driven a wedge between them that time and distance had only made wider. "You're right," Elias said finally. Ronan blinked. "What?" "You're right. Those men deserved what they got. I was wrong to judge you for it." His son just stood there looking like he'd been hit. "I've had 11 years to think about it," Elias continued. 11 years to realize that maybe I wasn't angry at you for what you did. Maybe I was angry because you were better at violence than I ever was, and that scared me. Made me worry you'd end up dead in some street somewhere because you were too quick to draw and not quick enough to walk away. That's supposed to be an apology? It's supposed to be the truth." Ronan turned away, looked out at the valley. The sun was starting to show over the eastern ridge now, painting everything in shades of gold and amber. "You know what's funny? I spent years imagining this conversation. All the things I'd say if I ever saw you again. All the ways I'd tell you exactly how much damage you did when you pushed me out. And now? Now I can't remember any of it. He turned back. I'm here because you asked, but we're not settled. You understand that? I do. Good. So tell me about Vane. Tell me everything. They went inside. Tommy was awake now, heating coffee on the stove. He froze when he saw Ronan, one hand drifting toward the rifle leaning against the wall. Easy, Elias said. This is my son. Ronan, this is Tommy Fairfield. He's been working here 3 years. Tommy relaxed slightly, but kept his distance. He'd obviously heard stories. Ronan poured himself coffee and sat at the kitchen table. Elias laid out everything, the pressure campaign, the cut fences, the threats, Vane's deadline. Ronan listened without interrupting, his expression unreadable. How many men does Vane have? He asked when Elias finished. Hard to say. 20, maybe 30, if he calls in everyone on his payroll. Armed? Most of them. His foreman, Marcus Tate, he's the dangerous one. Heard he killed 2 men in a gunfight in Abilene, and 3 more in disputes nobody wants to talk about. Ronan nodded slowly. I've heard of Tate. He's fast, but he's also sloppy. Gets overconfident. You planning to face him? Planning to avoid it if possible. But if it comes to that, Ronan shrugged. I've faced worse. Tommy spoke up from across the room. With respect, even if you're as good as people say, we're still outnumbered 10 to 1, maybe more. Numbers don't mean much if you control the terrain and pick your fight smart. Ronan looked at his father. What's your plan? My plan was to wait for you and your brother to get here, then figure it out. Caleb's coming? The surprise in his voice was obvious. Elias nodded. Sent him a telegram, same as you. Ronan sat back in his chair. When's the last time you talked to Caleb? About 9 years ago, his mother's funeral. He say anything to you then? Not much. Showed up, paid his respects, left the next morning. And you think he's going to drop whatever he's doing and ride back here to help you? I think he already knows about Vane. I think he's been tracking this situation longer than either of us realizes. Ronan frowned. What makes you say that? Before Elias could answer, they heard another horse approaching. This one came from the east, moving at a steady pace that suggested the rider wasn't in a hurry, but wasn't wasting time either. All 3 of them moved to the windows. The rider wore a gray coat and a wide-brimmed hat that shadowed his face. He rode straight through the gate without hesitating, like he had every right to be there. When he dismounted and took off his hat, Elias felt the years collapse. Caleb looked different than Ronan. Leaner, quieter somehow. Where Ronan carried himself like a storm looking for a place to break, Caleb moved like someone who'd learned to be invisible when necessary. His clothes were clean but worn, his horse was good but not flashy, and his eyes were the kind that missed nothing. He tied his horse next to Ronan's, glanced at the black duster hanging over the saddle, and his mouth tightened slightly. Then he walked to the porch. Elias stepped outside. Caleb. Father. The word was formal, distant, like they were strangers meeting at a business transaction. Didn't know if you'd come, Elias said. Almost didn't. Caleb's eyes moved to the door where Ronan had appeared. The 2 brothers looked at each other for a long moment. Ronan. Caleb. Been a while. 11 years. You've been counting. Hard to forget. The tension was thick enough to feel. Tommy had backed up to the far corner of the porch, staying out of the way. You 2 want to get this out of the way now, Elias said, or you want to wait until after we deal with the immediate problem. Caleb moved past his brother into the house without answering. Ronan watched him go, something complicated crossing his face, then followed. Inside, Caleb poured himself coffee and stood by the window, looking out at the land. Vane's deadline expires in 3 hours. He'll come with men. Probably not all of them at first. He'll want to make one more show of force, try to intimidate you into signing before things get violent. How do you know that? Tommy asked. Caleb glanced at him. Because I've been studying how Silas Vane operates for the past 8 months. I know how he thinks, how he moves, what tactics he uses. This isn't his first attempt to seize land through pressure campaigns. Ronan tilted his head. You've been investigating him? That's what I do. Investigate fraud, corruption, illegal land seizures. Vane's operation is all 3. You're a federal investigator? Among other things. Ronan laughed, short and sharp. Of course you are. Little brother became a lawman. Better than becoming a hired gun. The words were quiet, but they hit like fists. Ronan's expression went cold. That what you think I am? Isn't it? Last I heard, you were taking money to solve problems with bullets. Last I heard, you were hiding behind a badge and calling it justice. Both of you stop. Elias's voice cut through the room. I didn't call you here to fight each other. I called you here because Silas Vane is about to take this ranch and everything your grandfather built. And I can't stop him alone. The brothers fell silent. Caleb turned away from Ronan, focusing on their father. You can't stop him at all. Not with violence. He's got too many men, too many resources. You shoot one of his people, and he'll have the territorial militia here within 24 hours, claiming you're running an armed insurrection. So what do you suggest? Elias asked. I suggest we use the evidence I've already gathered. Forged land titles, falsified water claims, bribery of county officials. I've got enough to file federal charges against Vane and his entire operation. The only reason I haven't moved yet is because I needed one more piece, confirmation that he'd try to seize this property specifically. And now you have it, Ronan said slowly. Because he just gave Father an ultimatum. Exactly. If Vane comes here this morning and makes another demand, if he threatens force, if he does anything that confirms his intent, I can have federal marshals here within 48 hours with arrest warrants. Tommy spoke up. What happens in those 48 hours while we're waiting? We hold the ranch. We make sure Vane doesn't take it by force or fraud before the law arrives. Ronan stood up, walked to the gun cabinet, opened it. Then we prepare for a siege, reinforce the house, stockpile ammunition, set up defensive positions. That's insane, Caleb said. You're talking about starting a gunfight. I'm talking about being ready for one. Big difference. Is there? Because from where I'm standing, you sound like you're hoping for an excuse to shoot someone. Ronan turned, and the look on his face made Tommy step back. You know what your problem is, Caleb? You think everything can be solved with paperwork and procedure. You think the law actually protects people. But out here, the only thing that protects anyone is the willingness to stand your ground when someone tries to take what's yours. And your problem, Caleb shot back, is that you think violence solves everything, that being fast with a gun makes you right. Never said it makes me right, just makes me alive. Both of you, enough. Elias moved between them. You want to have this argument? Fine, but not now. Not when we've got 3 hours before Vane shows up, and we need to decide how we're handling it. The brothers glared at each other across the room. All the years of separation, all the words never said, all the resentment and anger and hurt, it was right there on the surface, ready to spill over. We use both approaches, Elias said. Caleb files whatever legal action he needs to file. Ronan, you help me prepare the ranch in case things go wrong. We cover both possibilities. That won't work, Caleb said. The moment shots are fired, my case gets complicated. Defense lawyers will claim we were the aggressors, that Vane's men were defending themselves. Then we make damn sure we're not the ones who fire first, Ronan said. We hold position, make them escalate if they want to escalate. Caleb studied his brother. You can do that. Hold your fire even if they're threatening you? I can do a lot of things you don't think I can. They stood there, tension crackling between them like electricity before a storm. Finally, Caleb nodded once. All right, but we do this smart. No heroics, no unnecessary risks. We document everything that happens. And if I say we stand down, we stand down. And if I say we need to defend ourselves, Ronan countered, we defend ourselves. Agreed. They didn't shake on it. Didn't need to. The understanding was there, fragile and uncertain, but real enough to build on. Tommy cleared his throat. So what do we do first? Ronan looked at the sun, now fully above the horizon. First, we get ready for company. The next 2 hours passed in focused preparation. Ronan walked the property with Tommy, identifying sight lines and potential defensive positions. Caleb stayed inside, writing out a detailed account of everything that had happened, preparing documentation that could be filed with federal authorities. Elias watched his sons work, seeing them move through the space with different skills but similar intensity. Ronan checked weapons and ammunition with the efficiency of someone who'd done it 1,000 times. Caleb organized papers with the same careful precision, different methods, same determination. Around mid-morning, Caleb came out to where Ronan was reinforcing the barn door. Need to ask you something, Caleb said. Ronan didn't look up. Ask. That reputation you've built? The stories about you being faster than anyone else? Is it true? Some of it. How much? Ronan stopped working, turned to face his brother. Why do you want to know? Because if Vane's men push this to violence, I need to understand what we're working with. They looked at each other. All those years of separation, and here they were, back on Mercer land, preparing to face something together. I'm fast, Ronan said quietly. Fast enough that most people don't even try. The ones who do usually regret it. How many men have you killed? The question hung in the air. More than I wanted to, Ronan said. Fewer than I probably could have. Every single one was trying to kill me or someone else first. That make a difference to you? Caleb considered this. Yeah, it does. Why? Because it means you still have a line. Means you're not just a killer like some of the stories suggest. Ronan went back to work on the door. Never been just a killer, but I stopped trying to explain that to people a long time ago. Let them think what they want. That why you left? Part of it. Father didn't want a son with blood on his hands. You didn't want a brother who reminded you what it meant to fail at being civilized. Neither of you said it, but I could see it. So I left and became exactly what everyone expected. Caleb was quiet for a moment. I never thought you failed at being civilized. No? No, I thought you were braver than me, willing to do the things I couldn't. I was angry about it because it made me feel weak. Ronan looked at him, genuinely surprised. You were never weak, Caleb. Maybe not, but I wasn't strong like you either. I found other ways to fight, quieter ways. Quieter doesn't mean weaker. Took me a long time to believe that. They worked in silence after that, but it was a different kind of silence, less hostile, almost comfortable. Inside the house, Elias sat at his desk and wrote a letter to his wife. He knew she couldn't read it, knew it was probably foolish, but he did it anyway. Told her about their sons coming home. Told her he'd been wrong about a lot of things. Told her he hoped he'd get a chance to make it right. He folded the letter and put it in his desk drawer, next to the wedding ring she'd worn for 42 years. Then he loaded his rifle and went to join his sons. At 11:30, Tommy called from the porch. Riders coming. Everyone moved to positions. Ronan took the window facing south. Caleb stood by the door with a notebook and pen. Elias went to the porch, unarmed this time, wanting to appear open to conversation. They came with more men than before. Elias counted 15 riders, led by Silas Vane on his gray gelding. Marcus Tate rode beside him, and the rest spread out in a loose formation that looked casual but was clearly calculated to surround the house. They stopped at the fence line again, but this time Vane dismounted. So did Tate and 3 others. Elias, Vane called out, my deadline's expired. Time to talk seriously. I'm listening. Vane walked closer, stopping about 10 feet from the porch. He made a show of looking around at the property. Beautiful morning, shame to ruin it with unpleasantness. Then don't. That's entirely up to you. I'm offering you one last chance. Final offer, 3 times what this property's worth. Enough money to live comfortable for the rest of your life. All you have to do is sign. Not interested. Vane sighed like a man dealing with a difficult child. You understand what happens if you refuse? I imagine you'll tell me. I'll do more than tell you. I'll show you. Vane gestured, and Marcus Tate stepped forward. Marcus here has a legal writ signed by a county judge declaring that I have water rights to Black Hollow Creek based on claims predating yours, which means, legally, you're trespassing on my property. That's a lie, Caleb's voice came from the doorway. He stepped out onto the porch, holding his own set of papers. Those water claims are fraudulent, filed using forged signatures and backdated documents. Vane looked at Caleb with interest. And you are? Federal investigator assigned to examine land fraud in this territory. I've been tracking your illegal operations for 8 months, Mr. Vane. Something flickered in Vane's eyes. Not quite fear, but close. Federal investigator. How interesting. You have credentials. Caleb showed them. Vane studied them carefully, then smiled. Well, this does complicate things, but not as much as you might hope. That a threat? It's a reality check. You might have evidence, investigator, but evidence takes time to process. Legal challenges take months, sometimes years. And I own enough judges and politicians that I can tie up your investigation until you're old and gray. He looked back at Elias. Meanwhile, I have that writ right now, which means I can remove you from this property by force if necessary, and the law, at least the local law, will back me up. Ronan appeared in the doorway next to his brother. He didn't say anything, just stood there in his black duster, his hand resting casual on his gun belt. Marcus Tate saw him and went very still. Vane noticed the reaction. "Something wrong, Marcus?" "That's Ronan Mercer," Tate said quietly. "Should that name mean something to me?" "It should if you value the men behind you. He's the fastest gun in 3 territories, maybe more." Vane looked at Ronan with new interest. "The outlaw. I've heard stories." "Bet you have," Ronan said. "You planning to add to your reputation today?" "Planning to stand here and protect my father's property. What happens after that depends entirely on what you decide to do next." The men behind Vane shifted nervously. Even from a distance, Elias could see them calculating odds, wondering if whatever Vane was paying them was worth facing someone with Ronan's reputation. Vane was smarter than to push it immediately. So the old man called in his sons. Both of them. One a federal investigator, one a notorious gunfighter. That's quite the reunion. "We're very close," Caleb said dryly. "I can see that." Vane pulled out a pocket watch, checked it. "Here's what's going to happen. I'm going to give you 24 hours to reconsider, 24 hours to look at the reality of your situation and make a smart choice. After that, I come back with the territorial militia and we remove you by force. Federal investigator or not, you're still trespassing on land I legally own." "You don't own anything," Caleb said. "And when I file my evidence with the district court tomorrow morning, everyone's going to know it. Then I guess we'll see whose paperwork matters more." Vane looked at Elias. "Last chance, old man. Take the money and walk away. Get off my land." Vane smiled. "Stubborn to the end. I respect that, even if it is stupid." He turned to leave, then paused. "One more thing. That federal investigation? Might want to ask your son about the limitations of his jurisdiction, because I've got friends in the territorial government who've been very interested in knowing whether he's been operating outside his authority. Would be a shame if his entire case got thrown out because he exceeded his legal mandate." He walked back to his horse, mounted up. His men followed suit. As they rode away, Caleb's face had gone pale. Ronan noticed. "What's he talking about?" "My jurisdiction is technically limited to federal land claims. Vane's operation touches those claims, but the core of his business is technically state level. If he can prove I've been investigating beyond my authority, your case falls apart. Worse, any evidence I've gathered could be ruled inadmissible." "Can he actually do that?" Caleb watched the riders disappear over the ridge. "If he's got the right politicians in his pocket?" "Yeah, he can." They went back inside. The tension that had briefly eased during preparation was back, heavier now. "So what's our move?" Tommy asked. Caleb sat down hard in a chair. "I need to review my documentation. Find a way to structure this that keeps the case solid, even if they challenge my jurisdiction." "How long will that take?" Elias asked. "Hours, maybe longer." Ronan poured coffee, handed a cup to his brother. Caleb took it without looking at him, already pulling papers from his case. The day wore on. Caleb worked at the table, making notes, crossing things out, rewriting. Ronan kept watch, rotating between windows. Elias tried to stay busy, but mostly just watched his sons, seeing them work in parallel, separate but somehow still connected. Evening came, they ate in shifts, nobody willing to leave the windows unguarded for long. Tommy asked questions about Ronan's past and got vague answers, asked about Caleb's work and got slightly less vague ones. Around midnight, Caleb finally pushed back from the table. "I think I've got it. It'll be tight, but if I structure the evidence as supporting documentation for federal land violations rather than leading with the state-level fraud, I can keep most of it admissible." "Most?" Ronan asked. "Better than none." "When do you file?" "First thing in the morning. There's a circuit judge in Silver Falls who's supposed to be clean. If I can get the paperwork to him before Vane's lawyers can intervene." He didn't finish the sentence, but they all understood. It was a race now. A race between legal process and whatever Vane planned to do with his 24-hour extension. Ronan stood up, stretched. "I'll take first watch. You two get some sleep." "I can help," Tommy offered. "Appreciate it. But you've been up for 2 days straight. Get rest while you can." The young man didn't argue. He found a bedroll in the corner and was asleep within minutes. Elias stood to leave, then paused. "Ronan." His son looked at him. "Thank you for coming." Ronan's expression was hard to read. "Didn't do it for you." "I know, but I'm thanking you anyway." After their father left, Caleb gathered his papers into neat stacks. "He means it, you know, the thanks." Doesn't change what he said 11 years ago. People change, people make mistakes. Some mistakes don't get fixed. Caleb looked at his brother. "You really believe that?" Ronan turned back to the window. "I believe actions matter more than words. He pushed me out when I needed him. Called me back when he needed me. That tell you anything? Tells me he's human. Tells me he's scared." "He should be scared. Vane's not bluffing." "Neither are we." Ronan glanced back. "You sure about that? Because from where I'm sitting, we've got one federal investigator with jurisdiction problems, one ranch hand who's barely old enough to shave, one 73-year-old man, and me. What about you makes this better?" "I'm not afraid to pull a trigger." "That's not better, Ronan. That's just different." They fell silent. Outside, the wind moved through the cottonwoods along the creek, making sounds like whispers. "You ever wonder what would have happened if we'd stayed?" Caleb asked quietly. "If neither of us had left?" "All the time." And I think we would have destroyed each other. You were trying to be everything Father wanted. I was trying to be anything except that. Would have torn this family apart faster than distance did." Caleb considered this. "Maybe you're right. I usually am. Still an arrogant bastard, I see. Still a judgmental prick yourself. But there was less edge in it now. Almost sounded like the kind of thing brothers might say to each other if they were on speaking terms." Caleb stood, gathered his papers. "I'm going to try to sleep for a few hours. Wake me if anything happens." "Will do." At the door to the spare room, Caleb paused. "For what it's worth, I'm glad you're here. Don't trust many people to have my back in a fight, but I trust you. Even though I'm just a hired gun, especially because of that. At least with you, I know what I'm getting." After he left, Ronan stood alone in the dark house, listening to it settle and creak. He thought about the last time he'd been here, the night he'd packed his saddlebags while his father slept. The way he'd looked back at the house from the ridge, wondering if he'd ever see it again. Now he was back, standing watch over the same land, protecting the same man who'd driven him away. Life had a sense of humor sometimes, dark one, but humor nonetheless. Dawn came cold and clear. Caleb was up before the sun, checking his papers one more time. Ronan made coffee. Elias joined them in the kitchen, looking like he'd slept even less than they had. "Vane comes back today," Elias said. "Not until evening, probably," Caleb replied. "He'll want to make us wait, let the pressure build. Gives you time to get to Silver Falls. Assuming I can get past anyone Vane might have watching the roads. I'll ride with you," Ronan offered. "Make sure you get there." Caleb looked surprised. "You do that?" "Rather have you file that paperwork than sit here waiting to see if we have to shoot our way out of this." They saddled horses as the sun climbed higher. Elias and Tommy would stay to guard the ranch. The brothers would ride to Silver Falls together, first time they'd ridden side by side in over a decade. Before they left, Elias pulled Ronan aside. "Bring him back safe," he said quietly. "That's the plan. I mean it. Whatever happens with Vane, with this ranch, with everything else, I can't lose another son." Ronan met his father's eyes. "Thought you already lost me." "I never lost you. I pushed you away." Big difference. They stood there in the yard, years of distance between them, and for just a moment it felt like maybe that distance wasn't quite as far as it used to be. Then Ronan mounted his horse, and he and Caleb rode out together toward Silver Falls and whatever waited there. Behind them, Elias stood in his yard and watched his sons disappear into the morning light, carrying with them the hope that maybe some things could still be saved before it was too late. They rode in silence for the first hour, following the valley road east toward Silver Falls. The morning was cold enough that their breath came out in clouds, and frost still clung to the grass and shadows where the sun hadn't reached yet. Ronan kept his eyes moving, scanning the ridges on both sides, looking for anything that didn't belong. Caleb noticed. "You expecting trouble already?" "I'm expecting Vane to be smarter than he's shown so far. Man like that doesn't give 24-hour extensions out of generosity. He's planning something. Or he's genuinely confident his legal position will hold." You believe that? Caleb adjusted his seat, his horse picking its way around rocks in the road. No, but I'm trying to stay optimistic. Optimism gets people killed. So does paranoia. Ronan almost smiled. There's the brother I remember. Always got an answer. Learned it from you. You think I don't remember all those arguments we used to have? You'd say something provocative just to see if I could counter it. Was teaching you to think on your feet. Was being an irritating bastard is what you were doing. This time Ronan did smile, brief and genuine. Yeah, that too. They rode on. The sun climbed higher, burning off the frost. The road curved through stands of pine and aspen, following the contour of the land. Twice they saw other travelers in the distance, a wagon heading west, a single rider going north. But nobody came close enough to be a problem. Around mid-morning, they stopped to rest the horses by a creek. Caleb pulled out the papers he'd packed, reviewing them one more time, while Ronan kept watch from a rocky outcrop that gave a clear view of the road in both directions. You ever think about what you'd be doing if you weren't doing this? Caleb called up to him. This being what? Whatever it is you do. Hiring out your gun, moving from town to town. Ronan was quiet for a moment. Sometimes. Usually when I'm cold and tired and wondering why I'm sleeping on the ground instead of in a bed. And what do you come up with? Nothing good. I'm not built for staying still. Tried it once, didn't take. Caleb looked up from his papers. When? Long time ago, right after I left home, actually. Worked as a ranch hand in Montana for about 8 months. Regular job, regular pay, regular life. What happened? Owner's neighbor decided he wanted the water rights to the property. Started the same kind of pressure campaign Vane's running now. Cut fences, scared cattle, made threats. Owner was a good man, but he wasn't a fighter. Asked me to help. And you did. Killed 3 of the neighbors' hired guns who came to burn down the barn one night. After that, word got around. People started hiring me specifically for that kind of work. Figured if I was going to get a reputation anyway, might as well get paid for it. Caleb folded his papers slowly. You regret it? Which part? Any of it. The killing, the reputation, the life you ended up with. Ronan climbed down from the outcrop, landing with practiced ease. I regret that it was necessary. Don't regret doing it. Men who burn barns with families sleeping inside don't deserve gentle handling. That's a fine line you're walking. It's the only line I've got. They mounted up again and continued riding. The road climbed now, winding through higher terrain where the trees grew thicker and the shadows deeper. Ronan's hand stayed near his gun, never quite touching it, but always ready. Caleb noticed. You really think someone's watching us? I think Vane didn't get where he is by being careless. And I think if I was him, and I knew a federal investigator was about to file charges against me, I'd have someone watching to make sure those charges never got filed. As if summoned by the words, a rider appeared on the road ahead. Just one, sitting his horse in the middle of the path like he owned it. Ronan held up a hand. They stopped. The rider didn't move, didn't call out, just waited. Friend of yours? Caleb asked quietly. Never seen him before. Could be coincidence. You believe that? No. They sat their horses, looking at the man blocking their path. He was maybe 40, weathered face, wearing range clothes and a gun belt that sat comfortable on his hips. Not a hired gun necessarily, but someone who knew how to use what he was carrying. We going around? Caleb asked. Not much room. Trees are too thick on both sides. So we go through him. That's one option. Ronan nudged his horse forward, slow and easy. Caleb followed. The stranger watched them approach, his expression unreadable. When they were close enough to talk without shouting, Ronan stopped again. Road's public. You planning to move or we got a problem? The stranger smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Depends. You boys heading to Silver Falls? Might be. Might want to reconsider. Town's not real friendly today. That's so? That's so. Word is there's some people there who don't take kindly to federal investigators poking around in business that don't concern them. Caleb spoke up. And who might these people be? Just concerned citizens, looking out for local interests. Concerned citizens who work for Silas Vane? The stranger's smile widened. Mr. Vane's got a lot of friends in this territory. Be a shame if something unfortunate happened to someone who was causing him difficulties. Ronan's voice went flat. You threatening my brother? Just offering friendly advice. Sometimes the smart play is to turn around and go home. Forget about filing paperwork that's going to get thrown out anyway. And if we don't take your advice? The stranger's hand moved toward his gun, slow and deliberate, not drawing, just making his intentions clear. Then I guess we find out if the stories about Ronan Mercer are true. You know who I am. Everyone knows who you are. Question is whether you're fast enough to save both yourself and your brother if things go wrong here. Caleb's horse shifted nervously. Ronan, stay behind me. You can't. I said stay behind me. The stranger was still smiling. Smart brother you got. Knows when he's outmatched. He's not the one you need to worry about, Ronan said quietly. Something in his tone made the stranger's smile falter. Just slightly, just for a second, but it was there. The moment of uncertainty that came when a man realized he might have miscalculated. Draw if you want, Ronan continued, his voice conversational now. But understand something first. I've been doing this longer than you, been faster than everyone who's tried me. And right now I'm protecting my brother, which means I'm not going to be generous about it. You pull that gun, you better be ready to die because I'm not shooting to wound. The stranger's hand stopped moving. He licked his lips, thinking hard. Or, Ronan offered, you can step aside, let us pass, and nobody has to bleed today. Your choice. But make it quick because I'm done talking. For a long moment, nothing happened. The wind moved through the trees. A bird called somewhere in the distance. The stranger's hand hovered near his gun while he calculated odds and came up with numbers he didn't like. Finally, he moved his horse to the side of the road. Ronan rode past him without looking. Caleb followed, tense and ready for the stranger to change his mind. But nothing happened. They continued down the road, and when Caleb glanced back, the stranger was still sitting there, watching them go. After they'd put some distance between themselves and the confrontation, Caleb let out a breath he'd been holding. That was close. Not really. He was testing, seeing if we'd scare easy. What if he hadn't backed down? Then it would have been close. You would have shot him. I would have defended us. There's a difference. Caleb was quiet for a while. Then, I forget sometimes what you are, what you're capable of. I'm your brother. That's what I am. You're also a killer. Ronan pulled his horse to a stop, turned to face Caleb directly. Yeah, I am. That bother you? It should, but it doesn't. That bother you? They looked at each other, and something passed between them. An understanding, maybe. An acknowledgement of truths they'd been avoiding for 11 years. We should keep moving, Ronan said finally. That was a scout. If Vane's got one man watching the road, he's got more. They rode faster now, pushing the horses harder. The road descended into a narrow canyon where the creek ran fast and cold beside them. Good ambush country. Ronan's eyes never stopped moving, checking every boulder, every stand of trees, every place a man could hide. They were halfway through the canyon when the shots came. The first bullet hit the rocks to their left, spraying stone chips. The second came from the right, closer. Ronan was already moving, pulling Caleb's horse toward cover behind a fallen tree. How many? Caleb asked, his voice tight but controlled. At least 3. Maybe more. Ronan drew his revolver, scanning the canyon walls. They're above us on both sides. Another shot. This one kicked up dirt 2 feet from where they crouched. They're not trying to kill us, Caleb said. They're trying to pin us down. Or they're terrible shots. Or that. Ronan studied the terrain. The canyon walls weren't quite vertical, but they were steep enough that climbing them while under fire would be suicide. The only way out was forward or back, and both directions were exposed. We make a run for it, he said, straight through. They're spread out, which means their fire won't be concentrated. That's your plan? Hope they miss? You got a better one? Caleb checked his own gun, a small revolver he carried for emergencies. How's your shooting while riding? Better than most. Then I'll handle the horses. You handle the shooters. They mounted fast. Ronan took the lead, Caleb right behind him. When they broke from cover, 3 more shots came immediately. 1 from ahead, 2 from behind, confirming Ronan's count of at least 3 men. He didn't shoot back right away. Instead, he watched for muzzle flashes, marking positions. There. Up on the left ridge behind a cluster of rocks. There. Right side, in the trees about 50 yards ahead. There. Further back, higher up. He fired 3 times in quick succession, not aiming to hit but to make them keep their heads down. The shooting stopped briefly. That was all the opening they needed. They rode hard through the canyon, low in their saddles, giving the shooters as small a target as possible. More shots came, but panicked now, rushed. One bullet passed close enough to Ronan's head that he heard it zip past. Another hit Caleb's saddlebag, punching through leather but missing anything vital. Then they were through, out of the canyon and into open country where the road widened and the terrain flattened. Ronan looked back. No pursuit yet, but they wouldn't have long. "Keep moving," he told Caleb. "They'll regroup and come after us." "Vane really doesn't want me filing those papers." "Can't imagine why." They pushed the horses to a gallop, eating up ground. Silver Falls was still 8 miles ahead. 8 miles of mostly open country where there wasn't much cover if the shooters caught up. Caleb rode beside him now, checking behind them every few seconds. "I see dust. Someone's coming." "How many?" "Can't tell yet. At least 2, maybe 3. Ronan calculated distances and time. The horses were strong, but they'd been ridden hard already. They had maybe 20 minutes before they'd need to rest, and the men behind them would be pushing just as hard. "There," Caleb pointed ahead. "That farmhouse. We could stop, make a stand." Ronan looked. It was a small homestead, set back from the road. A house, a barn, some outbuildings. Could work for defense if it came to that. But it would also mean putting whoever lived there in danger. "Keep going," he decided. "We get to Silver Falls, we're surrounded by people. Harder for them to try anything in town. Assuming the town's on our side." Assuming that, yeah. The riders behind them were getting closer. Ronan could see them clearly now. 3 men, riding hard, gaining ground. 5 miles to Silver Falls, then 4. The horses were breathing hard, foam showing on their necks. Caleb's mount was flagging, not used to this kind of sustained run. 3 miles. The riders were close enough now that Ronan could make out details. All 3 were armed. All 3 looked like they knew what they were doing. "They're going to catch us before we reach town," Caleb said. "I know." "So what do we do?" Ronan saw a curve ahead where the road bent around a rocky hillside. "Cover. Not much, but enough. When we reach that bend, we stop. Take positions. Make them think twice about coming at us directly." "You mean fight them?" "I mean, give them a reason to negotiate instead of shoot." They rounded the bend and pulled off the road, taking positions behind rocks. Ronan checked his ammunition. 6 shots in his revolver, 12 more in his belt. Caleb had maybe 8 rounds total. The 3 riders came around the bend at full speed, then pulled up hard when they saw the empty road. Smart. They knew what had happened. One of them called out, "Mercer, we just want to talk." "Then talk from there," Ronan called back. "Mr. Vane wants to make a deal." "He had his chance to deal. My father turned him down." "Not with your father, with your brother. He drops this investigation, Vane guarantees safe passage and compensation." Ronan glanced at Caleb. "Your call." Caleb stood up enough to be seen. "Tell Vane he can take his compensation and choke on it. I'm filing federal charges whether he likes it or not." The riders conferred among themselves. Then one of them raised a rifle. Ronan fired first, not at the man, but at the ground in front of his horse. The animal reared, nearly throwing its rider. The other 2 went for their guns. What followed was brief and loud and chaotic. Ronan put 2 shots near enough to one rider that the man dove from his saddle. Caleb fired at another, missing but making him take cover behind his horse. The third one got a shot off that ricocheted off the rocks near Ronan's head, spraying stone chips that cut his cheek. Then Ronan put a bullet through the man's shoulder and he went down screaming. The other 2 stopped shooting. "Next one's not a warning," Ronan called out, and I don't miss twice. "You shot Tommy. Tommy should have stayed behind his horse. He wants to bleed out or you want to get him to a doctor." The 2 uninjured riders grabbed their wounded friend, threw him across a saddle, and rode back the way they'd come. Ronan watched them go, then reloaded methodically. His hands were steady, but his heart was hammering. Adrenaline, mostly. It always hit after, not during. Caleb was breathing hard. "You really can shoot like they say." "Told you. I thought it was exaggeration. Most of it is, but not the important parts." Ronan mounted his horse. "We need to move. They'll be back with more men, or they'll circle around and try to cut us off closer to town. Is that what you'd do? That's exactly what I'd do. They rode hard for the remaining miles, and luck or fate or simple chance put them in Silver Falls an hour before sunset. The town was bigger than Redemption, but smaller than the territorial capital. Maybe 300 people, one main street, enough commerce to support a bank and a general store and 2 saloons. Caleb went straight to the courthouse, a 2-story brick building at the end of the main street. Ronan stayed with the horses, watching the road they'd come in on. Inside, Caleb found the clerk's office and asked for Judge Harlan Morrison. The clerk, a thin man with spectacles, looked nervous. Judge Morrison left town this morning. Family emergency in Denver. Caleb felt his stomach drop. When's he coming back? 2 weeks, maybe 3. Is there another judge available? Judge Wilson's here, but the clerk trailed off. But what? But Judge Wilson's been on Silas Vane's payroll for years. Everyone knows it, but nobody can prove it. Caleb stood there, feeling the weight of 8 months of investigation collapsing around him. Morrison had been his ace, the one judge in the territory who couldn't be bought. Without him, the case became exponentially harder. He went back outside. Ronan took one look at his face and knew. Morrison's gone, Caleb said. Family emergency. Convenient timing. Vane got to him. Or Vane got to his family. Either way, I can't file here. Not with Wilson. He'd throw out the case before I finished speaking. Ronan was quiet for a moment. Next nearest judge? Capital, 3 days' ride. Then we ride to the capital. Vane will have men watching every road between here and there. We barely made it this far. So we don't take the roads. Caleb looked at him. You're talking about cross-country, through the back country. I've done worse. That adds at least 2 days to the journey, maybe more if the weather turns. Also means Vane can't predict our route. Ronan checked the sun, calculating time and distance. We rest here tonight. Leave before dawn. Head north first. Make them think we're going to Fort Collins, then cut east through the mountain passes. That's rough country. Better rough than dead. Caleb wanted to argue, but he couldn't find fault in the logic. All right, but we need supplies. Food, ammunition, grain for the horses. They spent the next hour gathering what they needed. The general store owner was helpful until he found out who they were. Then suddenly half his inventory was unavailable. They ended up buying from 3 different places, paying too much, getting too little. Word was spreading. Vane's reach was longer than they'd hoped. They took rooms at a boarding house run by an old woman who didn't ask questions and didn't care who they were as long as they paid in advance. Separate rooms, both facing the street so they could watch for trouble. Ronan sat by his window as darkness fell, cleaning his gun and thinking about the man he'd shot. He'd been aiming for the shoulder, meant to wound not kill, but shooting while under fire and riding hard meant precision was harder to guarantee. The man might die anyway if the wound got infected, or they didn't get him to a doctor fast enough. That would make number 17. He tried not to keep count, but his memory didn't give him a choice. A knock on the door pulled him from his thoughts. Caleb stood there holding 2 plates of food from the boarding house kitchen. Figured you'd be up here brooding, he said. I don't brood. You absolutely brood, always have. Caleb handed him a plate. Eat something. We've got a long ride ahead. They ate in Ronan's room, sitting by the window, watching the street below. Silver Falls wasn't the kind of town that stayed up late. By 8 o'clock, most of the businesses were closed, and the streets were empty except for the occasional drunk stumbling from one saloon to another. You think they're out there? Caleb asked. Vane's men? Probably. Watching, waiting to see what we do next. How do we slip past them? Carefully, and with the assumption that we won't slip past all of them. Caleb set his plate aside. I've been thinking about what you said earlier, about being built for this. Yeah? I think I understand it now. This life you've chosen, it's not about wanting violence. It's about being willing to face it when necessary. That's supposed to be deep? It's supposed to be an apology. For judging you, for thinking you were less than what you are. Ronan looked at his brother. You spent 11 years thinking I was a killer. I spent 11 years wishing I had your courage. Took getting shot at for me to realize the difference. They sat in silence for a while. Outside, the town settled into night. Somewhere a dog barked. Somewhere else, a baby cried. Normal sounds of normal life happening all around them while they prepared for something decidedly not normal. Tell me about the investigation, Ronan said finally. The whole thing, how you ended up tracking Vane. Caleb leaned back against the wall. Started 18 months ago. Federal office got reports of fraudulent land claims in Montana. I was assigned to investigate. Found a pattern, fake signatures, backdated documents, claims filed on properties where the actual owners had recently died or disappeared. Traced it back to a series of shell companies, and all of those companies had one thing in common. Vane, indirectly. He was careful, always kept himself separated by at least 2 layers, but the pattern was clear. He'd identify properties with valuable resources, water rights mostly, sometimes timber or grazing land, then systematically acquire them through legal manipulation. Anyone who resisted got pressured until they sold or died or simply gave up. How many properties? At least 40 that I can prove. Probably twice that many if I had more time to investigate. Ronan whistled low. That's not just fraud. That's a criminal enterprise. Exactly. And the federal government takes that kind of thing seriously. If I can get this evidence in front of a judge who isn't corrupt, Vane's entire operation comes down. His assets get seized, his co-conspirators get arrested, and every single one of those fraudulent claims gets reversed. And the people he stole from get their land back. That's the idea. No wonder he's desperate to stop you. Caleb nodded. What I didn't expect was the personal connection. Didn't know he was targeting Father's ranch until about 6 weeks ago. By then, I was already deep in the investigation. Couldn't exactly call home and warn him without compromising my cover. So you've been tracking this from the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. While Vane's been squeezing Father, trying to force a sale before I could act, we've been racing each other without knowing it, until Father sent those telegrams. Until that, yeah. Ronan stood up, paced to the window. You could have told me. Before now. Could have sent word, let me know what was happening. Would you have listened? Last time we talked, you made it pretty clear you were done with this family. I said things I didn't mean. So did I. Caleb joined him at the window. But that's what we do, isn't it, Mercers? We say the wrong thing at the wrong time and then spend years wishing we could take it back. Learned it from Father. He learned it from his father. Probably goes back generations. Caleb smiled without humor. We're real good at pushing people away. Not so good at pulling them back. They watched the street. A figure moved in the shadows across from the boarding house. Could be innocent. Could be one of Vane's watchers. We leave at 4, Ronan said. Before sunrise, before the town wakes up. Take the north road for 2 miles, then cut east into the backcountry. And if they follow, then we make them regret it. Caleb went back to his own room eventually. Ronan tried to sleep but kept seeing the man he'd shot, the way he'd gone down screaming. Kept wondering if he'd live. Kept trying not to care and failing. He was still awake when the clock struck midnight. Still awake at 1. At 2, he gave up and just sat by the window, watching the street and thinking about choices made and roads taken, and whether any of it meant anything in the end. At 3:30, he heard movement in the hall. Caleb, already up and packing. They met in the stable, saddled their horses in near darkness, moved through the sleeping town like ghosts. The air was cold enough to burn their lungs. Overhead, stars were starting to fade as the sky prepared for dawn. They rode north as planned, keeping to a steady pace. Behind them, Silver Falls disappeared into the darkness. Ahead, the road stretched empty and pale in the pre-dawn light. 2 miles out, Ronan turned east onto a narrow trail that led into rougher country. Caleb followed without question. They climbed through pine forest and across rocky slopes, following game trails and creek beds, navigating by instinct and the gradual brightening of the sky. The mountains rose around them, dark shapes against a lighter darkness. When the sun finally broke over the eastern peaks, they were deep enough into the backcountry that the roads were far behind them and pursuit would be difficult, but not impossible. Ronan kept watching their back trail, looking for the telltale dust that would mean riders, kept listening for sounds that didn't belong, kept his hand near his gun even though they were alone out here. Or maybe because they were alone. This was the kind of country where a man could disappear and nobody would find him until spring. The kind of country that swallowed secrets and kept them. The kind of country where 2 brothers could ride side by side and maybe, finally, start to repair what had been broken between them. If they survived long enough. They rode through country that didn't forgive mistakes. The trail, if it could even be called that, wound through stands of lodgepole pine so thick the sunlight barely reached the ground. Rocks jutted from the earth at angles that suggested violence, some ancient upheaval that had left the land broken and angry. The horses picked their way carefully, ears swiveling at every sound. By midday, they'd climbed high enough that patches of old snow clung to the shadows. Caleb's horse stumbled on loose shale, recovered, kept moving. Neither of them had spoken in hours. There wasn't much to say that the country itself wasn't already telling them. Around 2 in the afternoon, Ronan held up a hand. They stopped. "What is it?" Caleb asked quietly. Ronan pointed. Down below them, maybe half a mile back, movement. 3 riders following the same general direction, not on the trail but parallel to it. "Could be coincidence," Caleb offered without conviction. "Could be. Except they're moving at exactly our pace and checking the same landmarks we'd use for navigation. So they tracked us, or they knew where we'd go. This is the only route through these mountains that doesn't add 3 days to the journey. Vane's smarter than I gave him credit for." Caleb studied the riders. "Can we lose them?" "Not easily. They're good, staying far enough back that we can't ambush them, close enough that we can't shake them." Ronan looked at the terrain ahead. "We've got maybe 4 hours of daylight left. After that, we're riding blind, and these mountains don't care if you're careful. So we make camp. Let them make the first move." "That's one option. What's the other?" Ronan was quiet for a moment, thinking. "We split up. I double back, come at them from a different angle. You keep heading east." "Absolutely not." "Caleb," I said no. "We stay together. You're the one with the evidence. You're the one who needs to reach the capital. I'm just the gun." Caleb turned his horse to face his brother directly. "You're not just anything, and I'm not leaving you to face 3 men alone." "I've faced worse odds. I don't care. We do this together or not at all." They stared at each other. The wind moved through the trees, cold and sharp. The riders below continued their steady pursuit. Finally, Ronan nodded once. "Together then, but we do it my way." "Which is? Find defensible ground. Make them come to us on our terms, and hope they're dumb enough to try." They rode another mile, climbing higher, until they found what Ronan was looking for. A narrow gap between 2 rocky slopes, barely wide enough for a horse. Anyone coming through would have to do it single file, exposed, with no room to maneuver. They set up camp just beyond the gap, visible from below but protected by the terrain. Built a fire. Made themselves obvious. "This feels like a terrible idea," Caleb said, checking his revolver for the 3rd time. "It is a terrible idea. But so is riding through the dark with 3 men hunting us. At least this way we control when it happens." "What makes you think they'll come tonight?" "Because they're being paid to stop you from reaching the capital. Every hour we ride is an hour closer to their failure. They'll want to settle this quick." Caleb fed wood to the fire. "And if they're smarter than that? If they just keep following, waiting for us to make a mistake? Then we'll deal with it when it happens. But men like that, hired guns working for someone else's money, they're not usually known for patience." The sun dropped behind the western peaks, turning the sky the color of old copper. Long shadows stretched across the valley below. Ronan positioned himself where he could watch the gap without being silhouetted against the firelight. Caleb stayed closer to the flames, making himself visible bait. Full dark came fast in the mountains. One moment there was enough light to see by, the next there wasn't. Stars came out hard and bright, so many of them it looked like someone had spilled diamonds across black velvet. "You ever miss it?" Caleb asked quietly. "The ranch. Home." Ronan didn't answer right away. "Sometimes. Usually late at night when I'm somewhere I don't want to be, doing something I wish I didn't have to do." "What do you miss most?" "The quiet. Not this kind of quiet where you're waiting for someone to try to kill you. The other kind, where you can hear the creek running and cattle settling and wind in the cottonwoods, where quiet means peace instead of threat." Caleb poked at the fire with a stick. "I miss the smell. Weird thing to miss, but I do. The way the air smells different there. Clean, like water and grass and distance. You ever think about going back? After this is over?" I used to think about it all the time. First few years after I left, I'd lie awake planning how I'd return. What I'd say to Father, how I'd prove I'd made something of myself. He was quiet for a moment. Then enough time passed that it felt impossible, like too much had happened to just walk back through that door and pretend nothing changed. Nothing did change. Not the important things. We changed.
Yeah, we did.
Ronan shifted position, his eyes never leaving the gap in the rocks. But maybe that's not as bad as we thought. Maybe we needed to become who we are before we could stand on that land again and actually appreciate what it meant. That's almost philosophical. Didn't know you had it in you. I'm full of surprises. An hour passed. Then 2. The fire burned low. Ronan added wood sparingly, keeping just enough light to maintain the illusion they were settled in for the night. Around midnight, the horses nickered softly. Both brothers went still. Movement in the gap. Shadows darker than the surrounding darkness, moving careful and slow. Ronan counted. 1, 2, 3. All of them on foot leading their horses. Smart, quieter that way. He waited until they were fully committed to the gap. No easy way to retreat before he spoke. That's far enough. The 3 men froze. We don't want trouble, one of them called out. His voice carried an accent. Texas, maybe, or further south. Just want to talk. Then talk from there. Mr. Vanes authorized me to make you an offer. We've heard his offers before. Not like this one. He's willing to let the investigator go. No pursuit, no retaliation. All he asks is that the filing gets delayed. 6 months, that's all. Caleb spoke up. 6 months gives him time to move his assets, cover his tracks, make half the evidence disappear. Tell Vane I said no. That's disappointing. The voice was different now, harder. See, we were hoping you'd be reasonable. Because if you're not reasonable, we've got instructions to make sure those papers never reach the capital. You can try, Ronan said. 3 against 2, and we know you're Ronan Mercer. Know you're fast. But nobody's fast enough to take all 3 of us before one of us gets your brother. You assume I care more about my brother than about surviving. A pause. Then nervous laughter. You rode all this way together. You care. Maybe. Or maybe I just hate men who hide behind threats instead of having the spine to face someone directly. The tension stretched tight. Ronan could feel Caleb beside him, coiled and ready. Could feel his own heartbeat steady and slow, the way it always got before things went bad. Last chance, the voice said. Agree to the delay, or we take those papers by force. Come ahead then. For a moment, nothing. Then the night exploded. The 3 men moved fast, splitting up, using the rocks for cover. Muzzle flashes lit the darkness like lightning. Ronan rolled left, came up firing. His first shot took 1 man in the leg, dropping him. His second missed as the target dove behind a boulder. Caleb fired twice at the 3rd man, both shots going wide. He wasn't a gunfighter, didn't have the instincts for it, but he was drawing fire, which was the point. Ronan moved through the darkness, using terrain and shadow. One of the men was shouting, trying to coordinate. Ronan put a bullet close enough to shut him up. Then everything went wrong. A 4th man, one they hadn't counted on, came from the side. Must have circled wide while the other 3 drew their attention. He grabbed Caleb from behind, gun to his head. Drop it, the man yelled. Drop it or I scatter his brains. Ronan froze. The other men emerged from cover, guns trained on him. The one he'd shot in the leg was on the ground, cursing, but still holding his weapon. The other 2 were unhurt and looking confident now that they had leverage. Gun on the ground, the man holding Caleb ordered. Slow. Ronan calculated. Distance, angles, light. Could he make the shot? Maybe. 50-50 chance of hitting the man instead of his brother. Those weren't odds he liked. He lowered his revolver. Smart choice. Now kick it away. Ronan didn't move. Let him go first. Not how this works. Then shoot him. But you better kill me too, because I will hunt down every single one of you, and what I do will make you wish you died here. The conviction in his voice made even hardened men hesitate. We just want the papers, one of them said. Give us the papers, and we all walk away. Caleb struggled against the arm around his throat. Don't give them anything. Shut up, the man holding him growled, pressing the gun harder against his temple. Ronan looked at his brother. Their eyes met across the darkness. In that moment, 1,000 things passed between them. Apologies for words said and unsaid, regret for years wasted, understanding that whatever happened next would define everything that came after. Caleb gave the smallest shake of his head. Then he went limp, dead weight, dropping suddenly. The man holding him stumbled, surprised. His gun moved off target for just a second. Ronan didn't think, just moved. His hand was already going for the knife in his boot, even as Caleb dropped. The blade left his hand in a smooth throw he'd practiced 10,000 times. It took the gunman in the shoulder, spinning him around. His gun went off, the bullet going wild into the rocks. Ronan dove for his dropped revolver, rolled, came up shooting. His first shot hit the man who'd held Caleb, center mass. The man went down and didn't move. The other two scattered. One ran for the horses. Ronan let him go. The other raised his gun. Ronan shot him in the arm before he could fire. Then there was silence, broken only by heavy breathing and the wounded man on the ground moaning. Ronan moved quickly, checking each man. One dead, two wounded, one fled. Not the cleanest resolution, but they were alive, and that was what mattered. Caleb sat up slowly, touching his throat where the arm had been. That was insane. Worked, though. We got lucky. I'll take lucky over smart any day. Ronan helped his brother up, checked him for injuries. You hurt? Bruised, scared, but alive. Caleb looked at the dead man. You killed him. He was going to kill you. I know, He trailed off, struggling with something. First time seeing someone die? First time seeing you do it up close. Ronan reloaded his revolver, not looking at his brother. This is what I am, Caleb. This is what I do. You saw it back at the ranch, but that was distance. This is close. This is real. You still okay with who I am? Caleb was quiet for a long time. Then, yeah, I am. Because that man would have killed me without blinking. And you stopped him. That matters more than how you did it. They tied up the wounded men, took their weapons. The one Ronan had shot in the leg was in bad shape, bleeding too much. Caleb used his medical kit, part of his investigator's gear, to bandage the wound as best he could. Why are you helping him? The other wounded man asked. He just tried to kill you. Because I'm not him, Caleb said simply. They left at first light, taking the outlaw's horses as spares. The men they left tied and bandaged, with enough water and supplies to last until someone found them. Maybe they'd live. Maybe they wouldn't. That was up to factors beyond Ronan's control. The ride after that was different. Caleb kept looking at his brother like he was seeing him for the first time. Not with fear or judgment, but with something closer to understanding. How do you do it? He asked as they climbed through a high pass. How do you live with it, the killing? Ronan was quiet for a long while. I don't know that I do. Not really. It's there, every face, every moment. I remember all of them. Does it get easier? No, it gets heavier. Each one adds weight until some days I can barely stand under it all. Then why keep doing it? Because the alternative is letting men like Vane win. Letting them take what they want through threat and violence and corruption. Somebody has to stand against that. Might as well be someone who's already carrying the weight. They crossed the pass as the sun climbed higher. Below them, the land spread out in shades of green and gold, stretching toward distant horizons. Somewhere out there was the territorial capital. Somewhere behind them was Mercer Ridge and a father waiting to see if his sons would come back. 2 days later, they reached the capital. They'd ridden hard, slept little, pushed themselves and their horses to the limit. But they'd made it. The capital was larger than either of them expected. Actual paved streets, buildings 3 stories tall, gaslights on the corners. It felt like a different world from the frontier valleys they'd left behind. Caleb went straight to the federal courthouse. Ronan waited outside with the horses, watching the street, waiting for the next threat to appear. It took 4 hours. 4 hours of Caleb presenting evidence to a federal judge, answering questions, documenting everything he'd discovered over 8 months of investigation. 4 hours of Ronan standing guard, turning away men who looked too interested, keeping his hand near his gun. When Caleb finally emerged, he looked exhausted, but he was smiling. Warrants issued. Federal marshals are riding for Vane's holdings within the hour. It's done. Ronan felt something unclench in his chest. It's really done? The investigation part, yeah, now comes the prosecution, the trial, all the legal machinery. But the core of it, stopping Vane from taking Father's ranch, that's done. They found a hotel, got rooms, slept for 14 hours straight. When Ronan woke, it was early morning and everything hurt. His back from the hard riding, his hands from gripping reins too tight, his shoulder where he'd landed wrong rolling away from gunfire. But they'd made it. Against odds that should have stopped them, they'd made it. He found Caleb in the hotel restaurant, eating breakfast and reading a newspaper. "Says here that Silas Vane was arrested yesterday evening," Caleb said without looking up. "Multiple federal marshals executed warrants simultaneously across 3 territories. His entire operation is being dismantled as we speak. How long until he's prosecuted? Months, probably, but he's being held without bail, flight risk. By the time he sees a courtroom, we'll have every piece of evidence documented and confirmed." Ronan sat down, ordered coffee. "What about the ranch? What about father?" "The injunction I filed protects it immediately. Vane can't touch it. Nobody can. Not until the court resolves all the land claims, and that'll take years. By then," he trailed off, "by then father might not be around to see it." Yeah, they sat in silence for a while. The weight of what they'd accomplished was settling in, but so was the weight of everything still unresolved. "We should go back," Ronan said finally. "Let him know it worked." "I was thinking the same thing." They rode out that afternoon. The journey back was slower, less urgent. No one was chasing them now. No one was waiting to ambush them. Just miles of open country and time to think about what came next. 3 days later, as the sun was setting, they crested the ridge overlooking Mercer Ridge. The ranch looked exactly as they'd left it, smoke rising from the chimney, cattle in the pastures, the creek running smooth and cold through land that had been fought for, bled for, and finally secured. Elias was on the porch when they rode up. He stood slowly like a man afraid to hope, and watched his sons dismount. "You're back," he said. His voice was rough, uncertain. "We're back," Caleb confirmed. "And it's done. Vane's arrested. The ranch is protected. You're safe." The old man's face did something complicated. Relief and grief and joy all mixed together. He sat down hard in his rocking chair, like his legs wouldn't hold him anymore. "You did it. You actually did it." "We did it," Ronan corrected. "All of us." Elias looked at his sons. Really looked at them. Maybe for the first time in years. Saw them not as the boys who'd left, not as the disappointments or the strangers, but as the men they'd become. "I was wrong," he said quietly. "About a lot of things. About what I said to you, Ronan. About pushing you both away. I was scared and I was stupid and I hurt the 2 people I should have protected." Ronan started to respond, but Elias held up a hand. "Let me finish. I don't know if I can fix what I broke. Don't know if you can forgive me or if you even want to. But I want you to know I'm proud of you, both of you, proud of who you became, even if I didn't have much to do with it, especially because I didn't have much to do with it." The words hung in the air between them. Years of hurt and anger and distance couldn't be erased with one speech. But it was a start, a real start. Caleb looked at Ronan. Ronan looked back. Some silent communication passed between them. "We're here," Caleb said finally. "That's what matters. We're here, and we're not leaving." "At least not right away," Ronan added. "There's fences to mend, literally and otherwise." Elias laughed, and it sounded like something breaking and healing at the same time. Yeah, there are." Tommy appeared from the barn, grinning. "You boys are a sight. Heard what happened in the Capitol. Federal marshals came through here 2 days ago, arrested 3 of Vane's men who were camped out watching the property. It was beautiful." They went inside. Elias heated coffee while Caleb and Ronan told the story. All of it. The ambush in the canyon, the fight in the mountains, the narrow escapes and close calls. When they got to the part about Caleb dropping to break free of the gunmen, Elias went pale. "You could have been killed." "But I wasn't," Caleb said, "because Ronan was there." The old man looked at his older son. "Thank you. For protecting your brother. For coming when I called, even though I didn't deserve it." "You're our father," Ronan said simply. "That's reason enough." They talked late into the night. Not about the past. That was too big to tackle all at once. But about the future. About what would happen with Vane's trial. About whether Caleb would stay to see it through or return to his work elsewhere. About whether Ronan might finally stop running and find a place to stand still for a while. No decisions were made. No promises beyond the moment. But for the first time in 11 years, the Mercer family sat together in the same room without the weight of old wounds crushing them. It wasn't forgiveness yet, wasn't healing. But it was honest, and that was better than either of them had expected. Outside, the creek ran through Black Hollow Creek like it always had. The cattle grazed, the wind moved through the cottonwoods, and Mercer Ridge stood, protected now not just by legal documents, but by something stronger, by family who'd answered when called, by brothers who'd learned that the distance between them wasn't as far as they'd thought, by a father who'd finally found the courage to say he was wrong. The fight wasn't over. Vane's trial would take months. There would be legal challenges, appeals, attempts to undermine the evidence. But the critical battle had been won. The land was safe. The water would keep flowing. And three men who'd spent years apart had found their way back to the same ground, scarred but standing, broken but still whole enough to matter. In the morning, there would be work to do. Fences to repair. Cattle to move. A ranch to run. But tonight, they sat together and let the silence be comfortable instead of heavy. Let the past rest and the future wait. Let themselves, finally, be a family again. The first week back, nobody talked about the future. They worked instead. Ronan and Tommy spent 3 days riding fence lines, repairing the damage Vane's men had done over months of quiet sabotage. Caleb stayed close to the house, organizing his documentation, preparing for the legal proceedings that would drag on for months. Elias moved through the daily routines of the ranch like a man remembering how to live without the weight of a threat hanging over him. On the fourth morning, Ronan found his father standing by the creek, just watching the water move. "You all right?" Ronan asked. Elias didn't turn around. "Been standing here thinking about your grandfather. He built the first irrigation channel right here, back in '48. Dug it by hand, him and 3 other men. Took them 2 months. I remember the story. He used to tell me that water didn't belong to anyone, that it just moved through the land and we were lucky enough to share it for a while. Said our job wasn't to own it, just to make sure it kept moving for whoever came next." Ronan stood beside his father, watching the creek. Vane didn't see it that way. Vane saw everything as something to own. Water, land, people. Everything had a price and everything could be bought. Elias finally looked at his son. "That's the difference between men like him and men like us. We understand that some things aren't for sale. Even when the price gets high enough to tempt you? Especially then." They stood in silence for a while. A hawk circled overhead, riding thermals. Downstream, cattle moved toward water, their movement slow and certain. "I need to tell you something," Elias said finally. "Something I should have said 11 years ago, but didn't have the courage for." Ronan waited. "When you left, when I told you to go, it wasn't because I thought you'd become a bad man. It was because I saw myself in you. The parts of me I'd spent my whole life trying to bury. The anger, the violence, the willingness to hurt people who deserved hurting. I thought if I pushed you away, maybe you'd become something better than I could have been. You were never violent. Wasn't I?" Elias's voice was quiet. "You don't remember because you were young, but there was a time, before you boys were born, when I handled problems the same way you do, quick and final. There was a man tried to claim jump this property, said my father's deed was forged, brought hired muscle to enforce his claim. What happened? I beat him so bad he never walked right again, put 2 of his men in the ground and the 3rd one ran. After that, nobody questioned my ownership, but your mother saw what I'd done, saw what I was capable of, and she looked at me different after that. Not scared exactly, just disappointed." Ronan had never heard this story. "She never told us. Because I asked her not to. Because I wanted you boys to think I'd always been what I became, a peaceful man who settled things with words instead of fists. But that wasn't who I was. It was who I forced myself to become because I couldn't stand the way Margaret looked at me after I showed her my real face. And when you saw that same face in me, Hub, I panicked. Thought if I kept you around, you'd make the same mistakes I did. Thought pushing you away was protecting you." Elias shook his head. "Took me 11 years to realize I was just protecting myself. Didn't want to see what I used to be walking around in my son's skin." Ronan thought about all the years he'd spent angry at his father. All the times he'd wondered what he'd done wrong, what failure of character had made him unworthy of staying home. "You could have just told me." "I know. But I was proud and stubborn and convinced I knew better. Same qualities that made your grandfather successful and made me a fool. You're not a fool. Maybe not, but I'm not as wise as I thought I was either. Elias turned to face his son fully. What I'm trying to say is that I was wrong. About you, about what you'd become, about everything. You didn't need me to save you from yourself. You needed me to trust that you'd figure it out on your own terms. Did I, though? Figure it out? You're here, aren't you? You came when I called, even though I'd given you every reason not to. You protected your brother. You helped save this ranch. That tells me you figured out more than I ever did. They walked back to the house together. It wasn't forgiveness. That would take longer, if it came at all. But it was understanding, which was maybe more valuable. That evening, all four of them, Elias, Ronan, Caleb, and Tommy, sat on the porch as the sun went down. Caleb had been going through his papers again, and something was bothering him. The trial's going to be complicated, he said. Vane's got lawyers. Good ones. They're already filing motions to suppress evidence, challenging jurisdiction, trying to separate his personal liability from his business operations. Can they win? Tommy asked. They can delay. Make it expensive and exhausting. That's what men like Vane do. They don't fight to win. They fight to make fighting not worth it. But you've got the evidence, Ronan said. I've got evidence. Whether it's enough depends on things I can't control. Judges, juries, politics. The territorial government has people in Vane's pocket. They'll do everything they can to undermine the case. Elias rocked slowly in his chair. So what are you saying? That this might not stick? I'm saying it's going to be a long fight. Months? Maybe years. And I can't do it from here. I'll need to be in the Capitol, working with prosecutors, countering every motion his lawyers file. The implication hung in the air. Caleb would have to leave again. How long? Ronan asked. Hard to say. 6 months minimum. Could be a year or more if they drag it out. And if you don't stay on it, then Vane's lawyers will pick the case apart piece by piece. They'll find technicalities, procedural errors, anything they can use to get charges reduced or dismissed. Without someone there to fight back, the whole thing could collapse. Elias was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, You should go. Caleb looked surprised. Father, you should go. This is your work, your calling. Can't ask you to abandon it just because I finally got my head straight about having you home. It's not abandoning. I'd come back when it's done. And if it takes 2 years? 3? You going to put your life on hold that long? Caleb didn't have an answer. I'm saying it's all right, Elias continued. You came when I needed you. You did what needed doing. Can't ask for more than that. Ronan stood up, walked to the edge of the porch. What about after? When the trial's over, win or lose? You coming back then? I don't know. Maybe. If there's a place for me here, there's always a place for you here. That's not the question. Question is whether you want it. Caleb looked at his brother, then at his father. I don't know what I want. Spent so long away that I'm not sure I remember how to stay. None of us do, Elias said, but we figure it out as we go. The conversation drifted after that, moving to easier topics. But the weight of Caleb's eventual departure settled over them like weather moving in. 2 weeks later, a rider came from the territorial capital. Federal marshals had completed their seizure of Vane's assets. 43 properties across 3 territories, all tied up in legal proceedings. The case was moving forward, slowly but surely. Caleb would need to leave within the month. The night before he was scheduled to go, the brothers sat together in the barn. Ronan was checking tack, getting ready for a cattle drive the next day. Caleb was ostensibly helping, but mostly just watching. You're going to stay, aren't you? Caleb asked. Here, at the ranch. Ronan ran leather through his hands, testing it for weak spots. For a while. Father needs help. And Tommy's good, but he can't run this place alone. That's not what I asked. What did you ask? Whether you're staying, really staying, or if this is just another stop before you move on to the next town that needs a fast gun. Ronan set down the tack. Honestly, I don't know. Part of me wants to stay, wants to believe I could build something here instead of just protecting things other people built. But the other part knows what I am, knows that peaceful doesn't come natural to me and probably never will. You think peace is natural to anyone? You think Father didn't work at it every day for 40 years? Peace isn't something you are, Ronan. It's something you choose, over and over until the choosing becomes habit. When'd you get so smart? Always was. You just weren't paying attention. Ronan smiled despite himself. Yeah, maybe. For what it's worth, I think you should stay. Not because Father needs you, though he does, but because you need this. Need a place to stand where people know your name means more than just how fast you are. And what if I mess it up? What if I can't be what this place needs? Then you mess it up, same as the rest of us. But at least you'll be here messing it up with family, instead of alone in some town where nobody knows your real name. They worked in silence after that. When the tack was checked and stored, they walked back to the house together. The night was clear, stars scattered across the sky like someone had thrown diamonds and let them stick where they landed. I'm going to miss this, Caleb said quietly. The quiet, the space, the way you can see for miles, and it's just land and sky and nothing complicated. Come back when you can. Door's always open. You sure about that? I'm sure we're brothers. That doesn't change just because we're living different lives. Caleb left 2 days later. Packed his papers, saddled his horse, said his goodbyes. Elias shook his hand, then pulled him into a hug that lasted longer than either of them expected. Tommy wished him luck. Ronan walked him to the edge of the property. Take care of Father, Caleb said. He's tougher than he looks, but he's not getting younger. I will. And take care of yourself. Try not to shoot anyone unless absolutely necessary. Can't make promises I won't keep, Caleb smiled. Fair enough. He mounted his horse, settled into the saddle. All right. Let you know how the trial's going. I'll try to write back. Not much good at letters, but I'll try. That's all I ask. He rode east toward the capital and the work waiting there. Ronan watched until he disappeared over the ridge, then turned back to the ranch. The days after that fell into rhythm. Work in the mornings, checking cattle, mending fence, maintaining buildings that always needed maintaining. Afternoons spent with his father, learning the business side of ranching, the parts Ronan had never paid attention to when he was younger. Evenings on the porch, watching the sun go down and the valley settle into darkness. It was peaceful in a way that should have felt boring, but it didn't. It felt earned. 3 months in, a letter came from Caleb. The trial had started. Vane's lawyers were fighting hard, but the evidence was holding. Looked like it might actually stick. 6 months in, another letter. Vane had been convicted on 12 counts of fraud. 23 more counts still pending. His empire was collapsing. Properties were being returned to their rightful owners. Elias read the letter 3 times, then folded it carefully and put it in his desk. Your brother did good work. He did. Couldn't have done it without you? We couldn't have done it without each other. That's the point. The old man smiled. When'd you get so wise? Always was. You just weren't paying attention. 8 months after Caleb left, Ronan was working on the south fence when he saw riders approaching. Not threatening, just 3 men on horses, moving slow and deliberate. He recognized one of them immediately. Marcus Tate, Vane's former foreman. Ronan's hand went to his gun automatically, but Tate held up his hands, showing he was unarmed. Just here to talk, Mercer. Talk fast, I'm not feeling generous. Tate dismounted, his 2 companions staying on their horses. He looked different than the last time Ronan had seen him. Thinner. Older, somehow. Like the past months had worn him down to something closer to his actual age. Vane's finished, Tate said. Convicted, assets seized, facing 20 years. His lawyers are talking appeal, but nobody thinks it'll work. Heard. Don't know why you're telling me. Because I worked for him. Did things I'm not proud of because the money was good and I told myself it wasn't my business what he was really doing. Tate looked uncomfortable. But I know what we did to your father. The threats, the intimidation, the property damage. I was part of that. You looking for forgiveness? No, looking to make it right, if I can. He pulled an envelope from his coat. This is every piece of correspondence between Vane and the county officials he bribed. Names, dates, amounts. Your brother's prosecutors will want it. Ronan took the envelope, but didn't open it. Why now? Because I spent 30 years being the kind of man who did what he was told and didn't ask questions. And I look back at all that time, and I can't point to a single thing that mattered. Nothing I built, nothing I protected, nothing worth remembering. Just money I spent and people I hurt, and a reputation that don't mean anything now that the man I worked for is in prison. That's supposed to make me sympathetic? It's supposed to be the truth. Take it or leave it. Tate mounted his horse. I'm heading north. Heard there's mining work in Colorado. Figure I'll try being the kind of man who earns his pay honest for a change. See how that feels. He rode off with his companions. Ronan stood there holding the envelope, trying to figure out what he'd just witnessed. Redemption, maybe. Or just a man tired of being what he'd been. He took the envelope to Caleb in the capital 2 weeks later, riding the distance in 3 days. His brother was thinner too, worn down by months of legal work, but he was smiling when he read through the documents. This is perfect. This fills in gaps we couldn't prove before. With this, we can go after the corrupt officials, not just Vane. Tate said he's trying to make it right. Think he means it? Ronan thought about the look in the man's eyes. Yeah, I think he does. People can change then. Good to know. They had dinner that night in a restaurant nicer than anything Ronan had been to in years. Talked about the case, about the ranch, about Tommy, who was courting a girl from town and making a fool of himself in the process. You're different, Caleb observed. Calmer, somehow. Ranch life's agreeing with me. Who knew? I did. Told you that months ago. You say a lot of things. Doesn't mean you're always right. I'm right more often than you admit. Ronan smiled. Yeah, you are. He rode back to Mercer Ridge feeling like something had shifted, like the pieces of his life that had never quite fit were starting to find their proper places. A year after the trial started, it ended. Silas Vane was sentenced to 22 years in federal prison. His properties were distributed back to their legal owners. The valley downstream from Black Hollow Creek had their water rights secured permanently. Caleb came home for a week to celebrate. They threw a party, not a big one, just the ranch hands from neighboring properties and a few people from town. Someone brought a fiddle. Someone else brought whiskey. They ate and drank and danced under stars that seemed brighter than usual. Elias stood on his porch watching it all, Ronan beside him. Your mother would have loved this, the old man said. She always said the best nights were the ones where the work was done, and all that was left was enjoying what you'd built. She was right about a lot of things. She was right about you. Told me the day you left that you'd come back when you were ready. Told me I just needed to be patient and trust that you'd find your way. How long did she say it would take? Didn't give a timeline, just said it would happen. Elias looked at his son. She was right about that too. Ronan watched the people dancing, saw Tommy spinning the girl he was courting, saw Caleb talking with federal prosecutors who'd made the trip out from the capital. Saw all of it and felt something he hadn't felt in years. Belonging. I'm staying, he said quietly. For good this time. If you'll have me. Elias didn't say anything, just put a hand on his son's shoulder and squeezed once. That was answer enough. Caleb left again after the week was up. Back to the capital, back to his work. But he came back more often after that. Once every few months, usually staying a week or two, long enough to help with major projects, short enough that he didn't feel like he was abandoning his career. Ronan stayed, worked the ranch with his father and Tommy, learned the rhythms of seasons, the patterns of weather, the 1,000 small skills that separated someone who worked land from someone who understood it. His reputation followed him for a while. People in town would point him out, whisper stories about the gunfighter who'd settled at Mercer Ridge. Some of the stories were true. Most weren't. Ronan stopped correcting them after a while. Let people think what they wanted. His actions would speak louder than any denial. 2 years after Vane's trial ended, a neighboring rancher's son got into trouble with claim jumpers. They came to Ronan asking for help. Not because they couldn't handle it themselves, but because they knew his presence would make the claim jumpers think twice. He went. Stood on the property line with the rancher's family behind him. When the claim jumpers showed up, he just looked at them, didn't say a word, didn't touch his gun, just looked. They turned around and left. After that, people started coming to him when disputes needed settling. Not for violence, for the threat of it, which was usually enough. His reputation became useful in a different way. Not as a killer, but as someone who could stop killing before it started. 3 years in, Elias's health started failing. Nothing dramatic, just age catching up. Slower movements, harder breathing, more time in his chair and less time on horseback. Ronan took over more of the ranch operations. Made decisions his father used to make, handled negotiations, managed accounts, planned for futures that might not include Elias. The old man didn't fight it, just offered advice when asked and stayed quiet when he wasn't. "You're doing good work," he told Ronan one evening. "Better than I did at your age. I had a good teacher. Had a stubborn teacher who didn't know when to ask for help. You're smarter than I was. Learn from your mistakes. That's all any of us can do. Learn from the last generation's mistakes and hope the next generation learns from ours." 4 years after everything started, Caleb came home for Christmas. Brought a woman with him, introduced her as his fiancée. She was smart and sharp and didn't take any nonsense from any of them. "You actually getting married?" Ronan asked when they had a moment alone. "Thinking about it. She tolerates my work schedule and doesn't mind that I disappear into frontier valleys for weeks at a time. Seems like a good foundation. Love would be a better one. I love her. Just took me a while to admit it." Caleb looked at his brother. "What about you? You ever think about settling down with someone?" "I am settled. Got the ranch. Got family. That's enough." "You sure?" Ronan thought about it. "No, but I'm not looking either. If it happens, it happens. If it doesn't, I've got enough to keep me busy." The woman, Sarah was her name, fit into the family like she'd always been there. She had opinions about everything and wasn't afraid to share them. Challenged Elias on his politics. Corrected Ronan when he was being stubborn. Made Caleb laugh in ways none of them had heard before. They got married the following spring in a small ceremony at the ranch. The whole valley came. People who'd never met the Mercers but had heard the stories. People who owed their water rights to Caleb's investigation. People who just wanted to celebrate something good in a world that didn't always provide many opportunities for it. 5 years after Vane's arrest, the valley held an election for county commissioner. They asked Elias to run. He declined, said he was too old. They asked Ronan. He also declined, said he wasn't the political type. They asked Tommy. He won. The night of his victory, he came to Mercer Ridge to thank them. "Couldn't have done it without you all," he said. "Without what you taught me about standing up to people who think money makes them right." "You did it on your own merit," Elias told him. "We just gave you a place to learn." "Well, I appreciate it regardless." Tommy looked at Ronan. "I'm going to need help. People trust me, but they trust you more. Any chance you'd consider being my deputy commissioner? Handle disputes, mediate conflicts, that kind of thing?" Ronan almost said no automatically, but then he thought about it, about using his reputation for something constructive, about building instead of just protecting. "I'll think about it," he said. He took the job 3 months later, found he was good at it. People respected him, but more importantly, they listened to him. When he said something needed to happen a certain way, they usually agreed. He wasn't always right, made mistakes, ruled incorrectly on a water dispute that caused problems for months, misread a situation between two ranchers and nearly let it escalate into violence. But he learned, adjusted, got better. 6 years in, Caleb and Sarah had their first child, a boy. They named him Elias. The old man cried when they told him, didn't try to hide it, just sat in his rocking chair and let the tears come. "Didn't think I'd live to see grandchildren," he said. "You're not dead yet," Ronan pointed out. "Close enough to see it from here. But this makes the view better." 7 years after the fight that saved the ranch, Elias died in his sleep. Peaceful. No pain. Just went to bed one night and didn't wake up. They buried him next to Margaret on the hill overlooking the creek. The whole valley came. More people than could fit in the house, so they stood outside in the yard and the pastures. People he'd helped, people he'd taught, people who'd never met him but knew his story. The preacher talked about legacy and faith. Ronan barely heard it, just stood there holding Caleb's arm, trying not to fall apart. Afterward, everyone came back to the house, brought food, told stories, laughed about the time Elias had chased off a bear with nothing but a frying pan, cried about the time he'd given them work when nobody else would. Late in the evening, when most people had left, Ronan and Caleb sat on the porch, same place they'd sat with their father countless times. "He was proud of us," Caleb said. "At the end, told me so the last time I visited. He told me too. Said we'd turned out better than he expected. High praise from a man who set the bar pretty high." "Yeah." They sat in silence. The creek kept running, the cattle kept grazing, the land kept being land, indifferent to the fact that the man who'd protected it for 40 years was gone. "What happens now?" Caleb asked. "To the ranch?" "We keep it going. That's what he would have wanted. I can't be here full time. My work—" "I know, but you can visit, can help make big decisions, can be part of this even if you're not here every day." "And you'll run it? Tommy and me together? He knows the business side better than I do. I know the land better than he does. Between us, we can make it work." "You sure?" Ronan looked out at the valley. "Yeah, I'm sure. This is home now, really home, not just a place I'm staying until something better comes along. This is where I belong." They ran the ranch together for 8 more years, Ronan as the primary operator, Caleb as a distant partner who came when he could. Tommy stayed on as foreman, then married his sweetheart and built a house on the eastern section of the property. The valley prospered, the water kept flowing, new families moved in, started their own ranches, built their own legacies. Ronan's reputation shifted again, not as a gunfighter, not as a deputy commissioner, but as the man who protected Black Hollow Creek, who made sure the water stayed available to everyone, who mediated disputes before they became violence. His gun stayed in its holster. Days turned into weeks, turned into months without him touching it except to clean it. He was 47 years old when he realized he couldn't remember the last time he'd seriously considered shooting someone. The realization made him smile. Caleb came home that Christmas with his family. Young Elias was 8 now, running around the property like his uncles had done decades before. Sarah was pregnant with their second. They stayed for 3 weeks, the longest visit yet. On the last day, Caleb and Ronan walked the property line like they'd done with their father years ago. "You ever regret it?" Caleb asked. "Staying here instead of whatever else you could have been?" "No, you." Not even once. Caleb watched his son chase cattle in the distance. "We did good, didn't we? We kept it going. Better than that, we made it mean something. You think Father would agree?" Ronan thought about the old man, about his stubbornness and his mistakes, and his determination to protect something worth protecting, about the way he'd finally learned to apologize, about the way he'd died knowing his sons had come home. "Yeah, I think he would." They stood there on Mercer land, looking at the creek that had started everything, the creek that Silas Vane had wanted to own, the creek that had brought 2 estranged brothers back together, the creek that kept flowing regardless of human drama, just doing what water does. "You know what's strange?" Caleb said. "We spent years fighting, Father and us with each other, all of us against Vane, and now it's just quiet, peaceful, almost boring sometimes." "Boring's underrated." "Is it though? After the life I've lived?" "Yeah, it absolutely is." Caleb smiled. "Fair point." They walked back to the house together. Sarah had dinner ready. Young Elias was telling stories about school. Tommy and his wife came over with their daughter. The house filled with noise and life, and the kind of chaos that families make when they're all in the same place. Ronan sat at the head of the table, his father's old place, and looked at the people gathered there. Blood family and chosen family. People who'd stood with him when things were hard, people who'd stayed when they could have left. This was what they'd fought for. Not just land or water rights or legal victories, this. The ability to gather together without fear, to build lives that mattered, to pass something worthwhile to the next generation. Later that night, after everyone had left or gone to bed, Ronan stood on the porch one more time. The stars were out. The creek was running. The valley was quiet in the way that meant peace instead of threat. He thought about the boy he'd been, angry and violent and desperate to prove something. Thought about the young man who'd left home thinking he'd never return. Thought about the gunfighter who'd built a reputation on speed and accuracy and the willingness to do what needed doing. All of that had led here, to this porch, this land, this life. It wasn't perfect. He still had nightmares sometimes about the men he'd killed, still felt the weight of old violence pressing down on him in quiet moments, still wondered if he deserved the peace he'd found. But he'd learned something his father had tried to teach him years ago. That redemption wasn't about erasing the past. It was about building a future that honored what you'd learned from your mistakes, about being better tomorrow than you were today, about understanding that you couldn't change what you'd done, only what you did next. The creek kept running through Black Hollow Creek, feeding 12 ranches downstream just like it always had. The land kept being land, solid and real and worth protecting, And Ronan Mercer kept standing watch over it all, no longer the fastest gun in 3 territories, just a man who'd found his way home and decided to stay. That was legacy enough.